I'm Mark Bunting, and we are at DX3 Canada. With me right now is Chris Young. He's a partner at EY Private Client Services. Good to see you, sir.
It's great to be here, Mark.
Now, I understand that the EY believes firmly that young companies, startup companies, really need to think about certain things right off the bat, and such as operations, tax compliance, cybersecurity. So let's start with operations. What do you think that these startup companies need to start doing right from the start?
At the start, it's sometimes just even thinking about it. A lot of startup companies are very focused on their customers and innovating for their customers, and that makes sense, customer first. Sometimes it also makes sense to stop and think, make sure we're asking questions about how we do things, how their internal processes are working, and that can lead to thoughts about, does it make sense to consider things like robotic process automation? Are there ways that we can be more efficient in what we're doing? And I find in today's world that even the smallest companies can start thinking about deploying some of these techniques in what they do.
Right, so as you say, it's one thing to have an idea and to run a business, but you need to be thinking about certain things. And then you've got tax compliance. It may be an area where some companies sort of maybe farm it out or they don't take it that seriously, but what's the importance of that?
Today's world is complicated. Let's be honest. Take the United States, for example. The tax environment there just gets more difficult to comply with. There are more rules, more regulations. US tax reform is something that's happened relatively recently. And with the various discussions I've been having with my clients, we find that just based on the evolution of compliance requirements, and the complexity of their business, they can find that there are compliance requirements that have crept in due to change, and it's really, really important to be thinking about these things. That's an example that I see in my client base. And
in the area of cybersecurity, we've seen some of the biggest companies in the world get hacked, so that's clearly an issue. So how does EY help companies deal with that area?
One of the things I wanted to mention about cybersecurity is that you mentioned that it happens to big companies, and there are some well-publicized cases out there for sure. I think it's important also to note that it's not just the big companies that need to be thinking about this. And I can say that even in my client base, I've had what might be called mid-market companies that have faced hacks of their information and have had to go through the process of understanding what that means for their internal controls, as well as dealing with paying the associated ransoms. And so this is an issue for companies large and small. I think companies should step back and almost take an inventory, if you will. This is the starting point. What is the information that we have that someone might want to misappropriate? That's the starting point, is knowing what we have and what we need to protect. And then that moves into a discussion with whomever about what are the things that we can do to protect that information.
And then would you agree that as every day goes by, and presumably a company's growing, the more and more data they're accumulating, and the bigger the data that becomes?
Absolutely. The more data you have, the more locations you have, where it's stored, where it goes, those are all things that need to be considered when developing a strategy for dealing with protecting that information.
And lastly, Chris, is there anything we haven't touched on here that you want to get across? Any message about EY's role with startup companies?
EY looks to be our clients' trusted business advisors, first and foremost. I think that any business issue that you might have, you might be surprised what an EY professional can bring to the table in terms of bringing forward solutions. It's not necessarily, and I think this discussion shows that, about accounting or taxation, but companies that face business issues like regulatory compliance, we've talked about cybersecurity, those are the kinds of things that we can assist our clients with.
Great stuff, nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, Chris.